In 1949, Billy Graham was a relatively unknown upstart evangelist. But that summer, 2 words would change that. After hearing about the success of Graham's ministry at an LA crusade, the media mogul William Randolph Hearst sent this 2-word directive to his editors nationwide. Puff Graham. Of course, he meant to talk him up positively, make a big deal out of him, and they did. And from there, Billy Graham's ministry just went absolutely viral. Just 2 words. 2 words can change everything. And what makes the difference is not the words per se, but the power behind them, the authority that's underneath them. There are 2 words like that in our text today. We're continuing our series going through the Gospel of Mark, and we're considering Mark chapter 2, verse 13. He went out again beside the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. 2 simple words, and Jesus changes the eternal destiny of Levi, and not to mention his life right here and now. Now, can I suggest today that these verses are in the Bible for us today, not so that we can overhear Jesus changing the course of somebody else's destiny, but because Jesus means to change our destiny with these 2 words. Follow me. There's a saying that's been attributed to the Victorian-era preacher Charles Spurgeon. Now, I looked and I couldn't find the exact words from him, but I found many sentiments similar to it. I found messages from a 4th century church father named Ambrose, as well as Augustine from the 5th century, who drew likely from Paul in Ephesians in the 1st century. But it's a great saying, and it speaks to the power of Jesus working in us, and it goes like this: without him, we can't. Without us, he won't. Now, what is meant by that is without the sovereign power of Jesus changing our desires from within, we cannot follow him. But without our response, without us taking an initiative, we won't follow him, and he won't use us as a vessel for his grace and mercy. So whenever you see someone following Jesus, underneath that is the sovereign power of Jesus at work. And if somebody isn't following Jesus, well, that power can still be at work, but action is going to eventually follow the sovereign power of Jesus within the individual. And this is maybe the best place in all of the Bible to demonstrate this very principle. So I'm going to draw from Spurgeon, who drew from Augustine, who drew from Ambrose, who drew from Paul. The point today is just very simple. Without us, he won't. Without him, we can't. So let's go back to verse 13. He went out again beside the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." Okay, so what do we find in the opening portion of this text? Well, Jesus is here. He's by the sea. This isn't the first time he was there, and he's teaching, right? And there's this magnetism to Jesus' teaching. Everybody is coming to hear him preach. He's just drawing people in through it. And we'll find this to be a continual theme in Mark's gospel, right? That the teaching, the preaching, the speaking and communication of Jesus is how he shows his authority, how he imparts who he is to people in his day, and how he sorts out who his followers are and who's just sort of a fan and just wants something from him. Right? You have other things. You have the miracles. You have that testifying to who he is. But the teaching of Jesus, his preaching, that's what the big deal is, and that's what Mark is showing us here. But let's notice in the text, as Jesus is teaching, first of all, where is Levi? Because Mark's going to give us a different angle on the authority of Jesus that we haven't seen thus far in this text. So let's notice where Levi is. We don't meet him among the crowds. We don't meet him among those who are listening to Jesus by the seaside. He doesn't even have the faintest interest in Jesus, likely. Because while everybody else is attending to Jesus, Levi is attending to his tax booth. Nothing here suggests that he was looking for a change of scene. And the kind of tax collection suggested by the Greek text here was that he was in a privileged occupation that had to actually be purchased from the Roman government. In other words, Levi was not drafted into this type of employment against his will. He apparently wanted the job bad enough to pay for it. Right? Think about that. And there's no indication here that he felt guilty, that he felt ashamed about his line of work. In fact, Levi's feelings about Jesus or his feelings about himself, they don't even come into play at all, because this is an entirely one-sided demonstration of Jesus and his authority to make disciples. Let me say that again. This is a one-sided demonstration of the authority of Jesus to make disciples whenever and wherever he chooses. There's a story I heard of this man, and it was the day before his wedding. He's transporting some of his bride's things to the new house they're moving into, and he catches a glimpse of this box in the back seat in his rearview mirror, and he notices that it's partially open, and inside the box he sees a crucifix, and there's a little message underneath it. And we don't know what the message was, some sort of benign Christian message. It wasn't a verse from Scripture. It wasn't anything totally profound. It was some type of poem, maybe footprints. I don't know. But God used that image to impress upon him the death of Christ for his sins. Right? He got into the car not intending to follow Jesus. He didn't want to be a follower of Jesus. And then God does something in his heart. He gets out of his car wanting to follow Jesus. Indeed, now he's following Jesus. So how do we account for that? Right? How do you account for you following Jesus? Right? We can only account for it by the authority of Jesus to make disciples wherever, whenever he wills. Right? Because look at the details of the story. Do we find the thesis of Jesus' argument? Right? When he calls Levi to become his follower, does he make a case? Does Jesus lay out a sales pitch listing out all the fringe benefits of following him? Or does he give Levi a survey and ask him, hey, what are you looking for in a rabbi? What do I need to change to get you to follow me? We can't find anything. There's no thesis, no sales pitch, not even a miracle, not even a demonstration of power to amaze Levi into following him. And this is what we need to understand about Jesus, that when it comes to calling disciples, Jesus isn't putting out a sign-up sheet and hoping for the best. Right? He's sovereign. So when he says to someone, follow me, I believe there is an irresistibility in that. Because I've not met a single person who had a real encounter with the living God who said, no thanks, I'm good. I'm going to go back to my normal life now. Now, it's a terrifying thing for some of us to consider. We would be totally dependent on God's will and God's power, right? Because that's what's at stake here. But when we find that thought terrifying, it's because we've not yet considered how terrifying the alternative is, to be left to ourselves. Right? And we can tend to think that my life is better in my hands, that I know what to do with it. I even know how best to put my life into the service of God. Really? What in the Bible would cause you to think that? What's profound and what's actually pretty troubling is that Jesus is the most misunderstood person in the New Testament, even to the people that knew him best. The only way we actually get traction with Jesus is when he reaches down into our hearts, takes out the heart of stone, puts in a heart of flesh, and makes it beat again. And Levi, he is this amazing example of that. I mean, here's the Son of God who's come down from heaven. He's clothed in human flesh. He's teaching beside the sea. Multitudes, thousands of people are coming to him to hear what he has to say and to see what he's going to do. God is literally within earshot of Levi, and what is he doing? He's sitting at his tax booth, minding his business. I'm just going to stay over here, then maybe Jesus will leave me alone. Right? That was his world, and frankly, that was our world as well. All of us were avoiding salvation. All of us were avoiding Jesus. When I was 18 years old, I didn't have an interest in following Jesus. I wasn't looking for him, but thank God he was looking for me, and he found me. And Levi was probably bothered by all the people that were there to see him, annoyed by Jesus' teaching, and people loitering around his tax booth. But Jesus intervenes. He pushes past all of them and puts his sights on Levi and says, "Follow me." And the good news of the gospel is that the one who has all power and authority on earth to make disciples is a gentle and lowly Savior, Jesus Christ. Right? If we had to pick one person in the universe that had that type of authority to change hearts and draw people to himself, we couldn't choose someone better than Jesus. We couldn't find someone more suited to the task because he's just, he is wise, he's merciful, he's gracious, he's patient, he's generous. Right? No one wants to fill heaven more than him. Tax collectors are no further out of the reach of Jesus than fishermen. Right? Now, we read passages like this, and if you grew up in the church, you probably heard a pastor preach about how unlike the tax collectors were in this day, and it's true. But I would just challenge you to find any century in the history of the world in which anyone smiled to see a tax collector coming. Doesn't exist. Right? But you see, Christ is not looking at us the way we look at us, because he calls normal day laborers like James and John and Andrew and Simon normal working class guys. But the thing is, he's also not put off by the very people that those guys would despise, like Levi, tax collectors. He moves towards them. He moves towards the whoever. So whatever your story is, whatever you've done, whoever you are, you need to know no one is too far from God's sovereign reach. Without him, without his gracious movement towards us, we can't. Number one. But without us, he won't. Number two. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. He said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. You feel the abruptness of that? Right? Luke adds in chapter 5 of his gospel that he left everything and followed him. Right? The immediacy of Levi's obedience to Jesus here demonstrates this immediate change of heart. So the point is that to be a follower of Jesus is to receive a life of actually adjusting to Jesus, right? Not the other way around, right? Some people today who claim to follow Christ, they talk about Jesus as if he were adjusting to their plans, right? Capitulating to them. Like they have what I would call a passenger seat Jesus, right? He's sitting next to you, he's in the passenger seat, and he's there to make sure you make the right turns. Well, that type of Jesus you're not going to find in the Bible. Because there's only one way to follow Jesus, and that is to follow Jesus. I know that's not a terribly profound point, but what I mean by that, it means to abandon the vehicle of self-dependence altogether instead of expecting Jesus to get into it with you. Not just to invite him as another passenger in your travel, but to actually get out of that altogether and follow him. Right? And if we're in the driver's seat, right, then we're not making any adjustments to Jesus. We're expecting him to make adjustments to us. And if the Jesus that you claim to know and worship likes all the same people you like, hates all the same people you hate, votes the way you do, thinks the way you do, does what you do, if that is the Jesus you know, I would propose that you are not following the true Jesus. Because the real Jesus is a constant adjustment for every one of us. Because he has something to say about how we spend our money. He has something to say about how we spend our time. He has something to say about what type of neighbor we are. He has something to say about our relationships and how we conduct ourselves in our marriage and in our families. Even our sexuality is not off limits to him. The real Jesus leads us in life-giving ways, but ways that are a constant adjustment to what we think is right. The psalm tells us that he leads us in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. In other words, it's him that gets the glory, not us. And the reason that the sovereign Jesus is the real Jesus and that's good news is that he gets the glory in people's salvation, right? So if I'm following Jesus, if you're following Jesus, it's not because we've somehow positioned ourselves to gain his attention, right? That we found his mercy through our own striving and our moral effort, or the opposite extreme where we were sinning really badly against him and somehow we created this scenario where Jesus has to step in and rescue me like some superhero. No, like I can't account for my salvation other than by the mercy of Jesus Christ. He gets 100% of the glory. Right? So he gets the glory. It's also incredibly humbling, right? Because there's not a single one of us following Jesus that can take credit for it, because I'm following Jesus not because I'm more clever or smarter or I have better morals than anyone else. And it's good news because it takes all the pressure off of me to keep up some sort of facade that other people's salvation is dependent on me. It takes all the burden off of my shoulders that I might be carrying over somebody else's soul, right? As if I could actually talk them into the kingdom of God in the first place. I can't. If anything, it puts me on my knees before God because I know there's nothing in me, there's nothing I could say or do that would actually cause someone to believe in Jesus. The whole nature of how God works in and through us is that he has to do the work through me. But it's not me who's doing the work to change someone's life. It's him. Fully trusting in Jesus and who he is, what that does is it changes us and it ends up creating this beautiful, wonderful, deep community of love and grace and acceptance and mercy where we don't have to corner people into making a decision for Christ. Because I can trust that Jesus actually has that under control. And perhaps the most wonderful aspect of this command here is the promise in it. And maybe you noticed that Jesus says, follow me. It's not like Moses who said, keep the law. Right? That's really impersonal. But when Jesus says, follow me, that's personal. Right? If I were to show up at your door and say, follow me, I'm not inviting you into some type of impersonal system. I'm inviting you into a relationship. Right? This is a personal communion with the living God, right? So think of somebody that you greatly admire and love and respect. If they knock on your door one day and say, hey, let's spend the day together. Are you going to think, well, I got to see what my calendar looks like for today. I think I've got some things to do. You're like, okay, nope, schedule's cleared. What do you want to do? Something even more amazing is happening here. The King of the universe is saying to you, to me, hey, come and live an adventure with me. Come under my protection, serve my cause, fight alongside me in the struggle of your time and against the spiritual forces of evil. Follow me. And followers of Jesus, let's never feel ashamed for having to follow him. Right? We don't have to follow him, we get to follow him. And if we could just catch a glimpse of who it is that's actually saying to us, follow me, then we would respond like Levi. Right? That's why I don't spend a ton of time trying to coax people off of the things that are keeping them from Jesus, because that's not the primary issue. Behavior modification isn't the ultimate goal of the Christian life, because there will always be something else to keep you from Jesus. You see, our biggest issue at any one time is that we don't see him clearly. If we could just see him for who he is, right? Because we follow him because we believe deep down he's someone who deserves to be followed. But that's the offer on the table, to follow him. William Randolph Hearst said those two words to his editors. The risen Jesus said those two words to his disciples. They went on to preach a virtually identical message for people to follow him. And here I am today saying hopefully what any one of you would say if you were in my position. I have a word from Jesus. Follow him. Without him, you can't. But without you, he won't.